In Jesus,
in Jesus,
in Jesus,
in Jesus.
no more pain. When you're growing weary and you can't seem to find a way, when you're losing hope in the fact that it's gonna be okay, in Jesus, no more pain. When you're losing patience and your faith is gone astray, when you start to question if God has really won the victory, in Jesus, no more pain, no more pain. In Jesus,
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 in Jesus.
in Jesus, no more pain.
Am I back against the wall? I just tried to do it all on my own. Seems like everything I tried, it just went wrong. Oh, yes, he pulled me from the fire, straight into the light, in Jesus, no more pain. In Jesus,
In Jesus,
in Jesus,
in Jesus,
in Jesus,
in Jesus,
in Jesus.
in Jesus.
Change the content for a blog post. So, in this function that we're creating, let's make sure we have a parameter. You could name it anything, like maybe input. I'll name it content. Before the word is, another opening parentheses, and then in between these two closing, have another closing. Okay, and then I'm going to add a space right here. And then I'm going to say, and then another set of parentheses. And now in here, I'm going to use or, and I'm going to include all three of our checkbox options. So if this one is checked, or if this one is checked, or if this one is checked. So if even just one of them is checked, then we are going to want to manipulate the content. So in this set of parentheses, I would just say get underscore option. The first one, we named it WCP underscore word count. Now after that string of text, but still inside there, I would say comma, the default value of 1. This default value is important because if the user just installs your plugin and then they haven't actually checked and unchecked and rechecked boxes and saved all their settings, well, this option won't actually exist in the database yet, right? If the user is just using the default option, we won't find anything in the database, so then WordPress will use this value that we're providing here as a fallback. Okay, so just after that one set of parentheses, now we can say, or if get option, this one would be quotes, WCP underscore character count, after the quotes, comma, default value, after just the one closing parentheses, one more, or get option, quotes, WCP read time. Again, the second option, the default value. I realized that line of code was very difficult to follow along with, so you can pause the video right now. I've broken it down to fit on multiple lines, or also know that you can always download my finished code for each lesson. There's a downloadable zip file that you can find after each video. Anyways, big picture, we just want to make sure that both of these are true and any single one of these is true. If that's the case, right, then in the curly brackets for our if statement, let's return. And what do we want to return? Well, we want a chance to manipulate or change the content for a blog post. So in this function that we're creating, let's make sure we have a parameter. You could name it anything, like maybe input. I'll name it content. So $content. And then since this function already has a bit of complexity to it, I'm just gonna pass the task off to a new function that will only have the one single responsibility of manipulating the string of text. So I'm just gonna say $this, right, our class or this instance of the object. Let's look inside it with dash at the beginning of the post, and we read. And let me go find a shorter post so we can see if it'll just say hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to learn how to make a plugin or theme easy to translate into another language. There are two main steps involved here. Number one is sort of hollowing out the code of our plugin so that it's flexible. And step number two is just using software that can automatically create sort of a template file so that it's simple for just about anyone to contribute a translated version of our plugin. Let's go ahead and get started with step number one, which is us sort of hollowing out our code. Now, we're not going to hollow out the entirety of our plugin because that would be super repetitive. Instead, I'm just going to pick two little pieces of text that will make flexible or translatable. It's something that when you do once, you'll know how to do it anywhere and everywhere that you need to. So for example, one string of text in our plugin that I'm going to make translatable in the admin dashboard. If you look in the settings menu, remember we have this link called word count that points towards our setting page. Well, let's make this actual text right here translatable. So for example, if someone was using our plugin and their installation of WordPress is using the Spanish language, well, assuming our plugin has been translated into Spanish, it should output Spanish right here. Okay, and then on the front end, just for another quick example, in our post info or word count statistics, let's just translate this first sentence that says, this post has X number of words. So just hollowing out those two pieces of text will show you everything you need to know to make your entire plugin or theme translatable. Okay, so at this point, let's get started. Let's jump into our text editor. And our very first step is to add a new couple of lines up at the very top within these comments. So we currently have these properties like plugin name and description. Let's just add a new property, and it needs to be named text domain : and now you can make up your own name, but I'm going to call it WCP domain. I'm just making this up. It's short for word count plugin domain. So just choose something that's unique to your plugin or theme. Okay, and then we want one other property. It is domain path : and let's give it a value of /languages. So this is just going to point towards a folder in our plugin folder, and it will be a new folder called languages. This will contain sort of the overall translation template and then any and all translated versions that we create. So maybe Spanish or German. Cool. So with just these two comments in place, we're ready to get started. Let's begin hollowing out a few strings of text in our plugin. So remember, let's begin with the admin link under the settings menu, this text right here that says word count. So in our plugin code, down towards the bottom, I'm just looking for our function that we named admin page. And when we're adding an options page here, this second argument. So here's what we do. Let's remove this string of text that just says word count. And instead, we're going to use a function that's just __. So two underscores, and then we just call it. And now we give it two arguments. So A, B as placeholders. The first argument is the original text. So we're creating this plugin originally in English. So we would just say that text we had just a moment ago, word count. And then the second argument is your plugin or theme's text domain. So remember, I named mine WCP domain. Cool. That's it. We just made that little piece of text or that string dynamic and easily translatable. Let's move on to the second example. Remember, we want to make this text that says, this post has blank words, easy to translate. So back in our code, let's look in our function that we named createHTML. Here it is. And then we're looking for the word count. For me, it's around line number 40. It will be a little bit different for you. But we see this post has. And now you'll notice that we sort of hard-coded the empty space within this string. Now, when people are providing translations for our code, we don't want them to have to unintuitively have an empty space at the end of their translation. So let's adjust this a little bit. So let's get rid of that space here, and then let's just add on an empty space like this. So now this can just be sort of the hollowed out placeholder. So let's get rid of this very first string. And we'll use underscore underscore, just call the function. So we'll say this post has, and then the second argument is our text domain, WCP domain. Cool. Let's do the same thing for words at the end. So again, we want it to begin with an empty space so the words don't run together. So let's just concatenate on an empty space and then concatenate on this, so we don't need the space there anymore. Now we don't need to translate the period at the end of the sentence or the HTML BR tag. So let's just end the quote here and then concatenate on just an opening quote like this. Right, so that way when people are providing translations for our code, they're only translating this little piece of text right here, just the word words. So now we can get rid of that and instead say underscore underscore, call it words. The second argument is our WCP domain. Okay, so we've hollowed out those two examples. Now before we save this file and I show you how to actually begin providing a translation in whatever language you want to experiment with, I'm going to choose Spanish. Before we get to that, there's just one more step. So let's go back up to the top of this file. We just need to add a little bit of code to tell WordPress to actually load our text domain files. We don't have any language files yet, but in just a moment when we actually go create a translation, we'll want to make sure that WordPress loads those files. Right, so that way when you go into the settings of your WordPress installation and if you switch the WordPress system language to Spanish, our plugin should know to just be automatically loading our translated files. So here's how we do that. Within our constructor function, let's just add a new top level action. So I'm going to say add action, semicolon, the name, let's just use the init action hook. Okay, and then let's use the callable syntax. So array, $this, comma, let's make up a method name. I'll just call it languages. You could call it anything you want to. And now let's create a function with that name. So function languages, parentheses, curly brackets. And here we're just going to use a WordPress function called load underscore plugin underscore text domain. Parentheses to call it, semicolon. And we're going to give it 3 arguments. So A, comma B, comma C as placeholders. The first argument is our text domain. So again, I chose a value of WCP domain. The second argument, I'm actually not 100% sure what this is. In the WordPress documentation, it just says deprecated and it instructs you to use a value of false. So that's what I'm going to go with. If you're super curious about this, you can just perform a Google search for this function name to find the official WordPress documentation. Okay, and then the third argument is just a path that points towards our languages folder. So instead of C, we can say dir name, call that function. Inside these parentheses, we can say plugin underscore base name, which is a function itself, so call that. Inside these parentheses, let's say underscore underscore file underscore underscore. Okay, and then after these 2 parentheses, but before the final third closing parentheses, let's add on a string of text / languages. If this was hard to type out with me, that's okay. You can always download the zip file for this video lesson to just copy and paste the code from my code. Okay, now I believe the translation software will create this folder for us if it doesn't exist, but just to play it safe in our plugin folder, why don't we go ahead and create it right now? So go ahead and create a brand new folder in your plugin folder, and let's call it languages. Okay, at this point we're ready to save our file and learn how to actually create a translation. Now, there are many different ways to create a translation, but I'd say the two most common are, number one, a piece of software named Poedit. It's available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. So that's one way to create a translation. The second way, which is the way I'm going to show you in this video lesson, is to use a WordPress plugin called Loco Translate. Now, there's nothing wrong with Poedit. I'm just a huge fan of this Loco Translate plugin. I feel like it's really optimized for WordPress. Its attention to detail is excellent, and as we'll even see in our next chapter, this plugin makes it easy to even translate for our JavaScript code. So I'm a big fan of this plugin. I strongly recommend that you use it. So let's go install this plugin right now. So in the admin dashboard, I'll go under plugins, add new. I will search for Loco Translate. It should be the first result. As of today, it's by Tim Whitlock, and you can see it has over 1 million active installations. So let's go ahead and install. Okay, and then be sure to activate the plugin. Okay, now in the admin dashboard, down towards the very bottom, you'll see a new option called Loco Translate. Let's go ahead and click on that. So yes, you can also use this plugin to translate a theme, but right now we're interested in translating a plugin. So if you scroll down towards the bottom here, running plugins, here we see our test plugin. And we know it's the plugin that we were just recently working on because we see that its text domain is that familiar WCP domain. So let's just go ahead and click on our test plugin. Okay, now before we actually create a translation, let's first create a template. So Loco Translate will look through our code for whenever we used the __ function. It will do a lot of the hard work for us, so we can just click Create Template. Cool, you can see it's going to create the template file in our plugins folder in the Languages folder. Let's click Create Template. Okay, now with that template created, we can actually create a translation. Again, I'm going to use Spanish, so if you want to follow along with me, let's just click New Language. So option number 1, choose a language. I'm just going to click here. The list of languages is very long, but if you just start to type, I'll type Spanish. It's a very long list. It's actually falling off the bottom edge of my screen right now, but if I click it, you can see that I chose Spanish Mexico. Okay, then for option number 2, I like to use this author option. So you can see it's going to output the file into our plugins folder, our actual plugin folder, and then in the languages subfolder. This is the option we want, right? As a plugin author, this is excellent. So let's click Start Translating. And this is the moment we've been waiting for. So this area down here has all of the different strings of text that it detected. And if we want to translate one, let's go with, for example, this post has. So you just click on that. So here's the source text, but then down here, this is where we can enter the translation. So I will just type esta entrada tiene, right? So just this post has in Spanish. Okay, let's also be sure to translate the word words. So I'll click on words right here. So down here, the Spanish translation of that is palabras. Okay, and then finally, let's translate the word count. Remember, this is the admin dashboard setting link text, so we can just click on that. For the translation, I will say, El recuento de palabras. Okay, for now I'm done, so just scroll up and click Save. Obviously, in the real world, if you were truly translating a theme or plugin, you would probably fill in 10, 20, 30, or even 50 translations, but we're just setting up a few as a quick example. Okay, so once you save your changes, now let's pretend that we actually are using WordPress with this language. So instead of English, let's go in to the WordPress settings screen. You don't even need to go into the submenu links, just the general main overview settings screen of WordPress. If you scroll down a little bit, maybe about halfway down the page, we see an option named Site Language. So mine is set to English, but let's click on this, and then I'm just going to search for Spanish of Mexico. And now be ready to see WordPress in a different language, so maybe try to memorize where certain things are. But let's click Save Changes, right? So would probably fill in 10, 20, 30, or even 50 translations, but we're just setting up a few as a quick example. Okay, so once you save your changes, now let's pretend that we actually are using WordPress with this language. So instead of English, let's go in to the WordPress settings screen. You don't even need to go into the submenu links, just the general main overview settings screen of WordPress. If you scroll down a little bit, maybe about halfway down the page, we see an option named Site Language. So mine is set to English, but let's click on this, and then I'm just going to search for Spanish of Mexico. And now be ready to see WordPress in a different language, so maybe try to memorize where certain things are. But let's click Save Changes, right? So we're simulating that someone is using our plugin and their WordPress is in a different language. So you can see the entire admin dashboard is now in that language. Well, aside from my custom post types, because I didn't actually translate that code. But all of the default options in WordPress have been translated. And let's look for our word count translation. So under the settings menu, remember the very last link? Perfect, there it is. So this is word count translated into Spanish. Let's look on the front end of our website. So if you refresh a single blog post detail screen, perfect. So this post has X number of words. Cool. And if we look in our plugin folder, in the languages subfolder, here is our overall template file. So people who are used to translating software, you can just give them this file and they will know what to do with it. And then oftentimes they will supply you with this sort of file, right? These files ending in .mo or .po. So if you have your plugin or theme translated into 10 or 20 different languages, then you would want to include, right, 10 or 20 different versions of these files in your plugin code like we have here. This way, no matter which language the user's WordPress installation is set to, you have them covered. Cool. Now, before we bring this lesson to a close, there is one security-related issue that I want to bring to your attention. So let's say that somehow, some way, one of the translated files that you're using has been compromised or has malicious code in it. In this case, maybe just a bit of HTML, like a strong or bold tag. That's not very malicious, but imagine it could be a script tag. The possibilities are endless, but really quick, I just want to show you how and why you would maybe escape text that's coming from a translation when you're actually outputting it as HTML. So for a quick example, let's go edit the translation for this Esta entrada tiene. So if we go back into Loco Translate, and we click on our test plugin, and we click on the Espanol. So let's find that this post has. Now imagine if we just wrap the word entrada in a strong tag. Obviously that in and of itself isn't malicious, but imagine if someone used a script tag and tried to include actual code. So this is just an example of proof of concept, but if we save this, and then if we refresh, notice that that actually did make the text bold, implying that text from the translation file is actually rendering as HTML, which is a potential security issue. So we just want to make sure that we escape this. So back in our code, let's look for our create HTML method, right? And here is the word count. You can see we're using this translation function, the underscore underscore. Instead of just underscore underscore, there's actually a function called ESC for escape underscore HTML and then underscore underscore. So just by changing which function we use here, now if we save and refresh, we're getting that same translation factor, right? It's pulling from the Spanish translation, but now it's not letting any actual HTML be rendered. It's escaping this into similar characters. So we're a bit more secure now, and that is going to bring this lesson to a close. So feel free to set your WordPress installation back to whatever language you were using before we started this lesson. So I will go back into general settings and just set my language back to English. Cool. Let's talk about where we go from here. So in our very next lesson, because practice makes perfect, we're going to start on a new plugin, and we're still going to be focusing on PHP for just this one more plugin before we jump into the next chapter, which is about JavaScript. So let me give you a sneak peek preview. In our next lesson, the PHP-based plugin that we're going to create is this word filter. There are two big things that make this plugin unique or different from the plugin we just built. So number one, if I click onto the settings page, this settings page is not using the WordPress generated form builder. So remember all of those confusing functions like section and field and having WordPress automatically loop through them? Now there are pros and cons to the auto-generated WordPress form pages. WordPress will automatically handle things for you like the nonce, different security issues, the form submission. However, there are times where you want to have full control over things. So we're going to learn how to have a completely custom settings page with all of our own code, both the HTML and the PHP that's processing the data. Okay, the other thing that's unique about this plugin is we're actually getting a top-level menu in the admin dashboard sidebar, and we're actually going to learn how to have our own SVG icon instead of a generic dash icon. Cool. This should be a lot of fun to set up. Let's keep things rolling, and I will see you then. Hey, hope you're enjoying the video so far. This is just a quick note that the next 4 lessons are only available in my full 36-hour premium WordPress development course. If that's something you're interested in the description for this video down below, you'll find a heavily discounted coupon link to join the course at the best price. Having said that, in this YouTube video right now, we're going to skip ahead to the JavaScript chapter. This should be a lot of fun. Thanks for watching. Let's jump into the action. Hello, everyone. In this lesson, we're starting a new chapter. Now, we're still within the 3-chapter plugin development section, but now our focus is going to be on JavaScript. In particular, I want to show you how we can use JavaScript to create new custom block types. Let's jump right into the action and let me explain. So if I begin to edit one of my posts, right, this screen is the modern block editor, and we know that by default, WordPress ships with a few basic block types. Each one of these is a paragraph block. I can try to insert a new block that perhaps is an image or a headline, gallery, list, quote. However, what if we as a developer want to create our own brand new, completely custom block type, and then we want to share it with the world as a plugin? Well, in order to do that, we need to dig into JavaScript, because as you might have guessed, these block types are fairly interactive. In real time, you are changing the text or choosing different options and customizing them. And in order to have things happen in real time like that, we need to use JavaScript. So in this chapter, we're going to use JavaScript and learn a little bit about the framework called React in order to build our own custom block types. Right, so our goal is when you try to insert a new block, we want a brand new type that we ourselves created. So without further ado, right now, let's go create a new empty plugin folder and begin moving forward together. So do this with me. In your WordPress installation, look for the WP content folder, and then go into the plugins folder. And then we just want to create a brand new empty folder, right? We're creating a new plugin together. So you can name the new folder whatever you want. Try to name it something unique, so a name that no other plugin has ever used before. Several lessons from now, once we're actually up and running, we're going to start building a multiple choice quiz type of block type. So I'm going to name my new folder, Are You Paying Attention? Okay, but you can choose whatever name you want. Then just go ahead and open up your new folder in your text editor. Inside our folder, let's create a new JavaScript file. So new file. This will just be a quick test to see how things work. So why don't we name the file test.js. Inside the file, just so we can make sure that it's actually loading, let's begin with an annoying alert pop-up. So just call the alert function and let's say hello from our new JS file. Let's give that a save. And now, even though most of our work in this chapter is going to be in JavaScript, we still need to use PHP to register a new plugin and then tell WordPress to load our JavaScript file when you're on the post editor screen. So in our new folder, let's create a PHP file. So new file, let's name it index.php. To save a bit of time in our new PHP file, I'm just going to paste in my clipboard. You can either pause the video and type this out, or really I'm just recycling the code from our previous plugin. So we're entering into PHP the generic plugin attributes, right? The name, the description, the version, the author, and then this line of code that prevents people from triggering our code by visiting the URL for this PHP file. Okay, with this boilerplate code out of the way, let's go ahead and create a PHP class, and then once we have our class up and running, we just want to enqueue or load our JavaScript file. So let's make up a new class, and then we can make up a name. I'll call it Are You Paying Attention? No parentheses, just curly brackets. Below this, let's create a new instance of our class. So let's make up a variable name, $. Let's call it maybe just lowercase Are You Paying Attention, and set that to equal a new instance of our class. So Are You Paying Attention, parentheses to actually use it or call it, and then end with a semicolon. Now in our class, let's create the constructor function. So that's just function __ construct, parentheses, curly brackets. Now getting back to the actual task at hand, we just want to tell WordPress to load our JavaScript file when you're on the block editor screen. So inside the construct function, we want to add an action. So add action, semicolon. We give it 2 arguments. The action hook name that we're interested in is onCue, which is a very easy word to misspell, but onCue block editor assets. The second argument is a function that we want to run. Let's use the array callable syntax. So the first argument is $this, then we make up a method name. How about admin assets? Okay, then let's go create a method with this name. So still in our class, but just below the construct function, we'll say function, let me scroll down a bit. function admin assets parentheses curly brackets, and then we're just going to on cue a JavaScript file. So we've already seen this back during the theme development chapters, but it's a function that WordPress offers to us named WP on cue script. Semicolon. We're going to give it 3 arguments for now. So ABC, the first argument is just a name that we're sort of giving this JavaScript file, right? Sort of a short name or variable name so WordPress can identify it. You can make up anything you want. I'll call it our new block type. The second argument is just a URL that points towards our JavaScript file. So let's use the WordPress function called plugin dir URL, parentheses to call it. Inside there, let's use the constant of underscore underscore file underscore underscore. So this will give us the URL of the folder that the current file is in. And then after that, so after the parentheses but before the comma, we're just going to concatenate on a string of text and just point towards our JavaScript file. So we named it test.js. Okay. The third argument is a list of dependencies. So let's give this an array. And for now, the only thing we really truly need to load is something called, so a string of text, WP-blocks. Now don't worry, in a few minutes we will learn what WP blocks is. So we'll learn why we're loading it here as a dependency and actually how to begin leveraging and using it. But for now, why don't we go ahead and save this and test it out. So back in WordPress, the first thing we need to do is go activate our new plugin. So back on the generic admin dashboard screen, in the sidebar, let's go under plugins. Let's find the new one that we just created. So remember, I named mine, Are You Paying Attention Quiz? So just go ahead and activate your plugin. Okay, and what we want to do now is test to make sure that the editor screen is loading our JavaScript file. So if we just go into posts and begin editing a post, perfect. We see that annoying alert pop up. Test.js. Inside the file, just so we can make sure that it's actually loading, let's begin with an annoying alert pop-up. So just call the alert function and let's say hello from our new JS file. Let's give that a save. And now, even though most of our work in this chapter is going to be in JavaScript, we still need to use PHP to register a new plugin and then tell WordPress to load our JavaScript file when you're on the post editor screen. So in our new folder, let's create a PHP file. So new file, let's name it index.php. To save a bit of time in our new PHP file, I'm just going to paste in my clipboard. You can either pause the video and type this out, or really I'm just recycling the code from our previous plugin. So we're entering into PHP the generic plugin attributes, right? The name, the description, the version, the author, and then this line of code that prevents people from triggering our code by visiting the URL for this PHP file. Okay, with this boilerplate code out of the way, let's go ahead and create a PHP class. And then once we have our class up and running, we just loads our JavaScript file. So that way we have no problems just accessing this from the global scope. So we're just, and instead, let's for now, so ABC, the first argument is just a name that we're sort of giving this JavaScript file. File, right? Sort of a short name or variable name so WordPress can identify it. You can make up anything you want. I'll call it our new block type. The second argument is just a URL that points towards our JavaScript file. So let's use the WordPress function called plugin dir URL, parentheses to call it. Inside there, let's use the constant of underscore underscore file underscore underscore. So this will give us the URL of the folder that the current file is in. And then after that, so after the parentheses, but before the comma, we're just going to concatenate on a string of text and just point towards our JavaScript file. So we named it test.js. Okay. The third argument is a list of dependencies. So let's give this an array. And for now, the only thing we really truly need to load is something called, so a string of text, WP-blocks. Now don't worry, in a few minutes we will learn what WP blocks is. So we'll learn why we're loading it here as a dependency and actually how to begin leveraging and using it. But for now, why don't we go ahead and save this and test it out. So back in WordPress, the first thing we need to do is go activate our new plugin. So back on the generic admin dashboard screen, in the sidebar, let's go under plugins. Let's find the new one that we just created. So remember, I named mine, Are You Paying Attention Quiz. So just go ahead and activate your plugin. Okay, and what we want to do now is test to make sure that the editor screen is loading our JavaScript file. So if we just go into posts and begin editing a post, perfect. We see that annoying alert pop up, hello from our new JavaScript file. This is great. So that means our own custom JavaScript file is loading on this screen. From here, it's very easy to register a new custom block type. So let's just write a little bit of JavaScript code together. So back in our test, a post. .js file. Let's get rid of the plugin dir URL parentheses to call it. Inside there, let's use the constant of underscore underscore file underscore underscore. So this will give us the URL of the folder that the current file is in. And then after that, so after the parentheses but before the comma, we're just going to concatenate on a string of text and just point towards our JavaScript file. So we named it text. test.js. Okay. The third argument is a list of dependencies. So let's give this an array, and for now, the only thing we really truly need to load is something called, so a string of text, WP-blocks. Now don't worry, in a few minutes we will learn what WP blocks is. So we'll learn why we're loading it here as a dependency and actually how to begin leveraging and using it. But for now, why don't we go ahead and save this and test it out. So back in WordPress, the first thing we need to do is go activate our new plugin. So back on the generic admin dashboard screen, in the sidebar, let's go under plugins. Let's find the new one that we just created. So remember, I named mine, Are You Paying Attention Quiz. So just go ahead and activate your plugin. Okay, and what we want to do now is test to make sure that the editor screen is loading our JavaScript file. So if we just go into posts and begin editing a post, perfect. We see that annoying alert pop up, hello from our new JavaScript file. This is great. So that means our own custom JavaScript file is loading on this screen. From here, it's very easy to register a new custom block type. So let's just write a little bit of JavaScript code together. So back in our test.js file, let's get rid of the annoying alert pop-up, and instead let's say wp dot, well, if you're using VS Code as your text editor like I am, you might have just got this exact same annoying feature. So when I typed WP and then attempted to type dot, it just sort of auto-filled that in for me. Now this is not what I want. So what you can do is type WP and then hit the escape key. And now I can type dot, okay, WP dot blocks dot register block type. And this is a method, so we want to call it. Before we give it any arguments, let's first talk about where this is coming from. So WordPress itself is going to add something called WP to the browser's global scope. Inside that object, there's going to be something called blocks, and inside that, there's something called register block type. So remember back in our PHP file when we listed WP-blocks as a dependency? Well, this is why. Because we want to make sure that it has already been loaded before WordPress.
I just started, I'm a beginner. I'm a beginner web developer. I'm trying to learn. It's all to build a website for, the truth, Jesus Christ.
WordPress loads our JavaScript file. So that way, we have no problems just accessing this from the global scope. So we're just using a function that WordPress gives to us, and now we want to give it two arguments. So a comma b. The first argument is the short name or variable name for our block type. So instead of a, let's give it quotes. And we actually want to begin with a namespace that is unique to our plugin. So why don't we call it our plugin slash, and now you get to the actual short name for our block type. I'll call it Are You Paying Attention? Okay, the second argument is a configuration object. So that just means we're going to give it curly brackets for a object in JavaScript. Inside the curly brackets, we can drop down, and now we're just going to spell out a few properties. Object in JavaScript is, so hit the escape key, and now I can type dot, okay, wp dot blocks dot register block type. And this is a method, so we want to call it. Before we give it any arguments, let's first talk about where this is coming from. So WordPress itself is going to add something called WP to the browser's global scope. Inside that object, there's going to be something called blocks, and inside that, there's something called register block type. So remember back in our PHP file when we listed WP-blocks as a dependency? Well, this is why. Because we want to make sure that it has already been loaded before WordPress loads our JavaScript file. So that way, we have no problems just accessing this from the global scope. So we're just using a function that WordPress gives to us, and now we want to give it two arguments. So a comma b. The first argument is the short name or variable name for our block type. So instead of a, let's give it quotes, and we actually want to begin with a namespace that is unique to our plugin. So why don't we call it our plugin slash, and now you get to the actual short name for our block type. I'll call it Are You Paying Attention? Okay, the second argument is a configuration object. So that just means we're going to give it curly brackets for a object in JavaScript. Inside the curly brackets, we can drop down, and now we're just going to spell out a few properties. So we need to use very precise or exact property names that WordPress knows to look for. The first one will be title. So title, colon, we give it a string of text. Now this is what people will actually see, so we are free to have spaces and uppercase letters. So let's say hello from our new JavaScript to the browser's global scope object in JavaScript. A namespace that is unique to our plugin. So why don't we call it our plugin slash. What we want to do is say to the browser, say, are you paying attention? Question mark. After that, let's have a comma. We want another property. Let's call it icon. And for now, we can just use a dash icon. So let's just say smiley, comma. Let's have another property called category. Let's just place it in the common category. There's also layout. I believe there's one called typography or text. For now, let's just go with common. Okay, now we want two more properties. So comma, we want property named edit. Now for its value, instead of giving it a string of text, we want to give it a function, a JavaScript function. So now we will learn more about code organization later on, but for now, let's just give it an anonymous or inline function. You could even give it an ES6 arrow function if you wanted to, but I'll just say function, parentheses, curly brackets. We will circle back to the body of the function in just a moment. But after this closing curly bracket, let's have a comma, and we want our configuration object to have one more property named save, colon, and again for its value, this should be a function. So function, parentheses, curly brackets. Now let's talk a little bit about what the edit and save functions are used for. The edit function controls what you'll see in the admin post editor screen, whereas the save function controls what the actual public will see in your content. So in both functions, we'll want to return a value, but we can't just return a traditional string of text. Instead, WordPress has its own way of describing and rendering HTML through JavaScript, and so we need to do things the way that WordPress is expecting us to. Let me explain what I mean. So in the edit function, what we want to do is return something. And what do we want to return? Well, we're going to start out by looking in the global or window scope of JavaScript for something called wp.element.createElement, which is a method, so parentheses to call it. So we're just leveraging this function that WordPress adds to the global scope of the browser. And this is the official WordPress way of creating an HTML element from within JavaScript. So within these parentheses, we're going to give it 3 arguments. So you could say A, B, C. The first argument is the type of HTML element you want to create. So a string of text, maybe this would be a P for paragraph element, or an unordered list, or a list item, or a heading level 1. Just for a quick example, why don't we add a heading level 3? Okay. The second argument is any attributes or properties that describe this element. So for example, if you wanted to give it an HTML class, or if you wanted to give it an inline style attribute. For now, we're just going to leave that blank, so we'll just give it a value of null. And then the third argument is the children or content for this element. So this is where we would include the actual text that would live inside the heading level 3. So let's say quotes, hello, this is from the admin editor screen. Okay, now in terms of our save function, let's just use this exact same code but slightly edit it. So I'm just going to copy this entire line.
Where was it again? I don't know if I can find it like this. No, I cannot find it like this. Oh, what was it called? No, maybe this is good. Oh yeah, my bad. This is good. Yeah. Let me see. Why is it not number 1? It's a really big group. Oh, this is sorted by... Okay, got you. Yeah, this one.
into my clipboard, paste it into the save function, only let's change the third argument to instead say, this is the front end. Okay, and just to make the difference crystal clear, you could even change the element to a heading level 1. Let's go ahead and save this. Now, technically, WordPress will always load WP element on the post editor screen. That's a very safe bet. However, it is a best practice to describe and tell WordPress what our plugin needs or what it depends on. So if we wanted to follow a best practice and really play it safe, we could go back into our PHP file, and when we're loading our JavaScript file, remember our array of dependencies? You could go ahead and say, comma, quotes, WP dash element, just to be 100% sure that that will already be loaded and exist before WordPress loads our file. So let's save that and give it a test. So on the post editor screen, be sure to reload or refresh. Okay, now imagine in between these two paragraphs, I want to insert a new block. So cool, you should see it as the very first option. Are you paying attention? If you don't see it, you could also always use the search menu to search for are you paying attention. Either way, let's just click it to actually insert it into our post. Cool. There's that heading level 3. Hello, this is from the admin editor screen. Now, if we actually click save or update and then view this blog post on the front end of our website, if we scroll down a little bit, there we see the heading level 1. This is the front end. Now, right away, the first thing I want to do is demystify what's going on here on the front end. What I mean by that is WordPress is absolutely not loading JavaScript right here on the front end. Now, yes, on the admin screen, WordPress is actually calling our JavaScript function to generate this element that we see on the edit screen. But once you actually click update or save, well, whatever our save method returns, that's just going to get saved into the database as a traditional piece of text. So if you open up Adminer or look at your database and go into the posts table and then click select data, if I go to the very last page and click edit on my most recent post and then look for the post content field, so you can see, let me zoom in a little bit. You can see WP:paragraph. That's the built-in default block type that WordPress gives to us for just a standard paragraph. But if we scroll down a little bit, here we can see WP:our plugin / are you paying attention? And literally the only thing getting saved into the database is just a simple piece of text. So as far as our front end is concerned, this has nothing to do with JavaScript. Now don't worry, later in this chapter we will learn how to include JavaScript on the front end of our website, but I think it's important to see this as early as possible. Ultimately, WordPress is just going to take whatever value our save method returns, and that's just getting added into the database like this. Now let's get back on track and talk about where we go from here. So back on the edit screen, we don't actually want the editor content to just be a heading level 3 with hard-coded text, right? Instead, we would want this to be dynamic and interactive, someplace where the user can type into a field or customize an option. However, in order to do that, we would need to be able to write fairly complex HTML, or at least HTML that's more complex than a single element with a single piece of content or children. And even though this create element method is the way that WordPress creates HTML from within JavaScript, no one, or practically no one, actually directly leverages it like this. Instead, in the real world, there's a syntax called JSX that looks almost identical to HTML, and it makes it very easy to spell out complex HTML interfaces from within JavaScript right here. Now, JSX is amazing. However, in order to use it, it does require a little bit of configuration or installation of development workflow tools on your computer. Now, while that can typically be complex or difficult to set up, Luckily for us, the WordPress team has created an official JavaScript package called WordPress scripts that makes the entire process 150 million% easier and simpler. So, in our very next lesson, we're going to learn how to use JSX here so that we can easily and elegantly spell out complex HTML interfaces. Let's keep our momentum rolling, and I'll see you then. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we're going to learn about JSX. Let's begin by making sure that we understand the problem that JSX solves. So in our previous lesson, we wrote this bit of JavaScript to create a heading level 3 with this as its content. Now, when you just need to create one single element, this code isn't too bad to type out. But in the real world, in HTML, we often need all sorts of container and wrapper divs, and then you're going to have 5 or 10 different children elements that might have nested contents of their own. In other words, spelling out a real-world HTML structure with this type of code is not enjoyable. I'm about to paste in a bit of example code, and you do not need to type this out. It's going to be an example of what we do not want to have to type out. I just want to show you, let me paste this in, that the create element function can indeed create complex nested HTML structures. It's just not enjoyable for you and I to have to manually type out. So remember, create element takes 3 arguments: the type of element you want to create, any properties or attributes describing that element, and then the third argument is the content for that element. So in this example that I just pasted in, I have a div, and then for its content, it's actually just an array of other elements. So I have a div with an h1 and an h4. You can see the h4, instead of null for the second argument, I give it a style object, and I set the color. So if I save this and reload, cool, you can see that there's a wrapper div. Well, you can't see the wrapper div, but there's a div with 2 pieces of content inside it. The color is working, perfect. Only no one wants to have to spell out HTML like this. It's not enjoyable, it's slow, inefficient, it's not intuitive. So if we can avoid this, we definitely want to. And this is where JSX comes into play. Now again, what I'm about to paste in, you do not need to type this out. This is just a quick demo, but what if instead of all of this, we could express this same HTML structure with just this? This looks almost identical to HTML. There are subtle differences, but this is very intuitive and easy for you and I to type out. So this is JSX, and it's going to make our lives so much easier. However, we can't just feed the web browser JSX directly like this. If I save this, we're going to run into all sorts of errors and problems, right? If I reload, WordPress has no idea what's going on. We see this error message, and this is because JSX in this syntax right here, this doesn't make sense to the web browser, right? The web browser speaks JavaScript. It does not speak JSX. So what we need is a tool in the middle that will take our source code and then convert it, let me Command Z, that will convert our JSX into this, and this is what will actually get fed to the web browser. Right, so essentially, you and I will get to write source code that looks like this. It can live in a folder named source, and then the automatic tool that converts this code, right, so if I put it back to this version of the file can live in a different folder called build, and that's what will tell WordPress to actually load. So right now, let me put my edit function back to the exact same way that yours is from our previous lesson. Okay, and now let's start to learn how we can use JSX. So first, we need to make sure that our computer has something called Node.js installed on it. Now, if you've watched the entirety of this course, odds are you already have Node installed on your computer. But if you've skipped ahead to this plugin development chapter, or if you're rewatching this course years later and you're on a new computer, maybe you don't have Node installed. Let me show you how you can check to see if you have Node installed. So in VS Code, on Windows you can press Control and J on your keyboard at the same time. On Mac you can press Command and J. Either way, that's going to open up your terminal or command line down here towards the bottom. Now I want you to run this command with me to see if you have Node installed. It's just Node and then a space, dash dash, so 2 dashes, version. Hit enter. If you see any sort of version number here, cool, you already have Node installed. If instead you see unknown command or command not found, you just need to go download and install Node. So you can pause the video lesson, go to the official Node website, nodejs.org. If you just Google for Node, this should be one of the first results. And then you can download either the long-term support version or the current version. You can't go wrong either way. So pause the video while your download completes. You should be able to just double-click the downloaded file, and then all of the default options are okay, so you can just click next, next, next. Once it finishes, you might need to restart your text editor or even your computer as a whole, but you'll know that everything was installed correctly if you try this command once again, node dash dash version, and you see a version number. Again, remember to toggle your command line in VS Code. It's Control J on Windows and Command J on Mac. Or instead of a keyboard shortcut, if you look in the VS Code View menu up at the top, you'll see an option called Terminal. That will do the same thing. So go install Node.js if you need to, but at this point in the video moving forward, I'm going to assume that everyone has Node installed. Now that we have Node, we can go ahead and set up the tool in the middle that will convert our JSX into code that looks like this. In the past, setting up an automated tool like that might have been a bit complicated, but luckily for us, there is an official WordPress JavaScript package. So it's just the @WordPress/scripts. So how do we download and use this? Well, when we installed Node on our computer, we also installed something called npm, short for Node Package Manager. Now, before we use npm to download that WordPress scripts package, let's first sort of create a grocery list in our folder that will keep track of any JavaScript dependencies we need. To do that, I want you to run the following command with me. So it's npm space init space and then -y. Let's press enter. Okay, so that will create a package.json file that keeps track of everything we're going to install with npm. Really though, we only need to install one package right now, right? We want the @WordPress/scripts package. So type this command in with me now. npm
I should restart.
install, and then the name of the package was @WordPress.
I should run as administrator, just in case.
/scripts. And in 2021, this isn't 100% necessary, but if you want to, you can say --save-dev to mark it as a dev dependency. Go ahead and press enter, and now depending on the speed of your internet connection, this will take a minute or two. The official WordPress JavaScript package makes use of lots and lots of other smaller packages, so be patient, this will take a minute. Once it completes, the question becomes, how do we use it? Well, the nice thing about this package is that it requires almost zero configuration. In other words, it has a certain folder and file structure.
Oh well. Just hope it doesn't mess anything up.
Structure that it's going to look for. So in our plugin folder, I want you to create a new subfolder with this exact name. So new folder, it needs to be exactly src, short for source. Okay? Inside that new source folder, I want you to create a new file, and let's name it index.js. Now inside this brand new, totally blank index.js file, why don't we just copy and paste over the contents from our test.js? So open up test, just select everything in this entire file, copy it back in our new index.js file, paste it in. We can save that. We can actually go ahead and delete our test.js file. We no longer need it. Okay, now within our index.js file, let's try to use a bit of JSX. So within our edit function, what are we going to return? Let's get rid of all of this. So right now I just have a function, I'm returning nothing. What I really want to return, well, is just a bit of JSX. So let's have a heading level 3 and say this is an H3 from JSX. Let's give that a save. Okay, so now we just need a way to tell that WordPress package to convert this file for us. Here's how we do that. I want you to jump into the package.json file. We're looking for the area called scripts. Right now there's just this one test script. So maybe on a new line right above the test, let's say quotes build colon string of text wp-scripts build. So essentially, we're just creating a command that we can run in the command line called build. We do want to set up one more script or command. So at the end of this line, let's add a comma. And then on a new line, let's say quotes start colon and then string of text wp-scripts start. Be sure to end that line with a comma as well. Let's go ahead and save this. And we now have everything we need. So check this out. In our command line, we can now run one of these tasks, either build or start. Start is nice because it will watch us ongoing. And every single time we save a change to one of our files, it will automatically rebundle up the converted version on the fly. So the build command, on the other hand, that just performs a one-time build. So when you're actively developing though, start is a very, very useful command. So let's do this. We just say npm run and then the name of the script or command that we're interested in, which is start. So npm run start. Go ahead and press enter. Okay, and here's where things get interesting. Notice in our folder, we didn't create this folder named build. So the WordPress
don't think I need this. What do I do again? I need to touch the Webpack. Touch the Webpack. Where are you going, dude? See? Users. Source. Repos. Can I just freaking copy paste that? Wow, what the hell are you doing? This is the slowest thing ever.
JavaScript package did this for us. Inside of the build folder is a converted copy of our index.js file. Now, it's not meant to be human readable, so if you open it up, it's not the easiest thing to look through. It's optimized for a browser, not for a human to read. But if you scroll down, for me it's around line number 106. It'll probably be different for you. Or you could just press Command F or Control F and search for the text that you typed. But here you can see it automatically converted our JSX into create element, and then those are the 3 arguments again. So we don't have to ever write this unintuitive code again. We just write it the way that we want to write it in the source folder, and this automated script will do the rest for us. And because we used the start script, it's still watching us. So if I change this from a period to 2 exclamation marks and hit save, watch what happens in the command line. Well, it wasn't a huge change, but the point is it just ran again. So if you check the copy that lives in the build folder, look, it's automatically been updated. There are the 2 exclamations. So the point is, we just now want to tell, let me close this file. We just want to tell WordPress to load this version of the JavaScript file in the browser. So to do that, we would just go into our index.php file, and we're looking for our function that we named admin assets. We're just looking for the path that points towards our JavaScript file. So instead of test.js, let's hollow out these quotes. We would instead just say, go into the build folder / and load the file named index.js. Let's give this a save. And now if we refresh the post editor screen in WordPress, awesome. This is a H3 from JSX. Now that it's up and running, let's practice with more complex or nested HTML. So back in our source code, so in the source folder index.js, if you only have one single element and a single line of code, you can use this syntax. However, if you want to have multiple lines and multiple elements, we do want to return a pair of parentheses, and then inside those parentheses, now we can have multiple line HTML. Well, technically it's not HTML, it's JSX, but you get the point. So let's practice. Let's have a div. So I'll type div and then hit tab. Now your VS Code might not give you the automatic tab triggers right away. If you want to make sure that your VS Code is set up like mine and that HTML tab triggers are recognized inside of JSX, here's what you can do. There are multiple ways to set this up, but this is the simplest, and I've yet to see a single drawback or downside to it. So open up your VS Code settings. On Windows, that's Control and comma. On Mac, that's Command and comma. Okay, then I want you to click this icon right here towards the top right. So you can control all sorts of different settings and options in this file. The one that I want to draw your attention to is the one that I'm highlighting right now. So I've just set a global and permanent file association. Ever write this unintuitive code again. We just write it the way that we want to write it in the source folder, and this automated script will do the rest for us. And because we used the start script, it's still watching us. So if I change this from a period to 2 exclamation marks and hit save, watch what happens in the command line. Well, it wasn't a huge change, but the point is it just ran again. So if you check the copy that lives in the build folder, look, it's automatically been updated. There are the 2 exclamations. So the point is, we just now want to tell, let me close this file. We just want to tell WordPress to load this version of the JavaScript file in the browser. So to do that, we would just go into our index.php file, and we're looking for our function that we named admin assets. We're just looking for the path that points towards our JavaScript file. So instead of test.js, let's hollow out these quotes. We would instead just say, go into the build folder / and load the file named index.js. Let's give this a save. And now if we refresh the post editor screen in WordPress, awesome. This is a H3 from JSX. Now that it's up and running, let's practice with more complex or nested HTML. So back in our source code, so in the source folder index.js, if you only have one single element in a single line of code, you can use this syntax. However, if you want to have multiple lines and multiple elements, we do want to return a pair of parentheses, and then inside those parentheses, now we can have multiple line HTML. Well, technically it's not HTML, it's JSX, but you get the point. So let's practice. Let's have a div. So I'll type div and then hit tab. Now, your VS Code might not give you the automatic tab triggers right away. If you want to make sure that your VS Code is set up like mine and that HTML tab triggers are recognized inside of JSX, here's what you can do. There are multiple ways to set this up, but this is the simplest, and I've yet to see a single drawback or downside to it. So open up your VS Code settings. On Windows, that's Control and comma. On Mac, that's Command and comma. Okay, then I want you to click this icon. Right here towards the top right. So you can control all sorts of different settings and options. In this file. The one that I want to draw your attention to is the one that I'm highlighting right now. So I've just set a global and permanent file association. So I'm saying that any JavaScript files should not just use the JavaScript syntax reader or interpreter, they should use JavaScript React. Now this is not a plugin, you don't need to install anything to make this work. VS Code has JavaScript React or JSX syntax built in. You just need to tell it to actually use it for JavaScript files. Cool, so with this in place, your HTML tab triggers will work inside a block of JSX. Okay, so inside our div, let's practice having multiple elements. Maybe we'll have a paragraph and just say, hello, this is a paragraph. Maybe below that, we'll have a heading level 4 that says, hi there. Now, there's more to JSX than what we've seen here, but we don't need to learn too much about JSX right here, right now. We can organically and gradually learn more about JSX as we go. For now, let's go ahead and save that. And if we reload, cool, you can see our block type is using our nested or a little bit more complex structure of HTML. Really quick, I do want to show you that if you modify what our save function returns, well, you can easily add a new instance of our block type, but watch what happens to an existing block type that's already embedded in a post. So if we make a change to our save function, so what do we want to return? Just a bit of JSX. So maybe parentheses, drop down, let's have a div. Let's actually cover a very important rule in JSX, and that is that you can only have one top level element. So if I try to have a heading level 3 here and then below that a heading level 5, this will not work. This is not valid JSX. In JSX, there can only be one sort of top level or root level element. Now this doesn't mean that you have to have a semantically meaningless div wrapper. Instead, you can use something called a React fragment. So we could open this up with this symbol, just sort of an empty opening tag, and then you can have a closing wrapping fragment tag. So this is indeed valid JSX. Let me change what the actual text here is. If we save that, now because we already have this block, which is an instance of the block we're working on, if we refresh, WordPress says, uh-oh, no way. This block contains unexpected or invalid content. This is totally normal and to be expected, and we'll learn more about why this is happening and how to avoid this issue in a future lesson. For now though, you can just click on that block and delete it. And then you can always just insert a new copy of the block. Cool. So if we click update, and then if we view that post on the front end, perfect. H3 and H5 on the front end. And that is going to bring